Welcome back to the Saturday Scholars College Football Podcast. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. That is Zan. I am Shub, and today we are here to begin SEC win totals, part one, numero uno. We have one of three videos left to do, man, and then we have successfully done deep dive analysis on the entire Power Four, which is it's a long bridge to cross, but we're almost there. We're rounding third base, I think. We're heading home, and save the best for last for the SEC. So this batch of teams, this is basically the former SEC East teams minus Missouri. So we just decided to do these, break these down into three videos. We'll do the former SEC East teams today. We're going to do the geographically central teams tomorrow, and then later this week we will put out the geographically SEC West teams and the newbies in Oklahoma and Texas. So that'll be a fun one, saving that one for last. So how we doing, man? You ready to get going on the former SEC East schools here?
Yeah, man, it's the SEC. It's time to talk ball. I'm excited.
All right, let's go. Well, we're going to start doing this in alphabetical order. So starting up at the top, it's my alma mater, the Florida Gators. And Zan,
you got to start us off. You got to start us off. This is your school.
I will do that. So Florida coming in with a win total of 5 wins, even on Caesars. A little juice there to the under at minus 125. Man, Florida program has not been doing too well lately. Billy Napier's had bit of a rocky start, and it's his third season, and a lot of people believe that he is on the hot seat. Gators went 5-7 last year, did not make a bowl game, and it was one of their first losing seasons that they've had in a long time. It was the second losing season in a row, or third losing season in a row, and it's truly been a rough time for Billy Napier. So he's got a lot of pressure on his hands right now going into year 3 in 2024. So starting with the offense, 8 out of 11 starters returned from last year. Florida had the 34th most efficient offense last year. Very quietly, pretty good offense. Graham Mertz, of course, the centerpiece. He returns, fifth-year senior quarterback. Lots of starting experience for him. He's been a starter almost every single year that he's played in college football. And he quietly put up very solid numbers last year. And I think that's one thing that when people look at Florida and people think of Graham Mertz, I think a lot of people maybe think of him as maybe a below average SEC quarterback, but he was very quietly very solid last year. I think he quietly was a very good system fit for Billy Napier. And he's an older guy. I expect him to put up solid numbers again this year. Expect the same there. And unlike last year, Florida has some quarterback insurance because 5-star true freshman DJ Lagway is finally in the building, and Lagway so far, he has lived up to the billing. All the reports and things that I've seen about him, he looks like he is living up to the billing, which is phenomenal. It's very exciting as a Gators fan, but Mertz is the guy for this year. I expect to see Lagway in some packages, maybe some design runs throughout the year, but the good news is that if Mertz goes down, Lagway is the guy, and he is the future of the program. As far as receiver, losing Ricky Pearsall last year, the draft is big. Did not expect Ricky Pearsall to go in the first round, but hey, he ended up going to the first round. So
I don't think Ricky Pearsall expected to go in the first round.
exactly. If you would have told me at the beginning of the year that Ricky Pearsall would go higher in the draft than Keon Coleman, I would have bet significant money that that would never happen, and I'm a Gator fan, but it happened. Anyways, we returned Trey Wilson. Elite season, I think, is ahead for him. Trey Eugene Wilson, he's a star. He's definitely going to be an NFL guy, potential future first-round pick himself. And he's going to be the alpha, the wide receiver 1 on this year's team. And in addition to that, Florida brought in some good depth behind him. Transfer wide receiver Elijah Badger comes in from Arizona State. Very good addition there. And then Shamiri Dike comes over from Wisconsin. And he's a guy that has familiarity with Mertz. So 2 very good pickups there. I like the depth behind Wilson at receiver. I think overall it's better than last year. And then at tight end, you have true sophomore Arlis Boardingham. He looks to take a step forward from last year. He's younger, so I think a progression is something that Florida would like to see from him in the tight end spot. As far as running back, Trevor Etienne, Trader, goes to Georgia. We all know how that went down. So he goes off to UGA, but we returned Montrell Johnson, very solid last year. And then Trayon Webb is a guy that's behind Montrell Johnson, that I think showed some promise and I think is ready to step up and take some snaps. Montreal Johnson is injured right now and he's questionable to return at the beginning of the season, so we'll see how that goes. But I feel confident in Treon Webb and the running backs behind him. But needless to say, overall it's a pretty big downgrade from Trevor Etienne. He's going to be an NFL running back. Hate to say it. And then offensive line. I think offensive line is due for some improvement, returning experience all around in this unit. You got left tackle Austin Barber, who is very solid. He returns, potentially could be an NFL guy later in the draft in the future. Right tackle Cameron Waits, graded below average last year, but Florida hopes to see him take a step forward. And then on the interior, you got center Jake Slaughter, who actually graded out as the best offensive lineman last year. That's a nice returning piece. And then you have Najee Harris at left guard, plus value last year in 7 games of snaps. Overall, in terms of line yards, the offensive line was middle of the pack in the SEC. I expect a little bit of progression this year, nothing crazy, but I like the experience coming back. And so I think the offensive line will be a tick better than it was last year. Moving over to the defense now, we got 6 out of 11 starters returning. Defense has been the Achilles heel of the Florida Gators the last several years and dating back through the Mullen era as well. 75th last year in defensive efficiency. Princely Uman Milan was a big loss along the edge. He goes off to Ole Miss to play for Lane Kiffin. The rest of the room, however, along the defensive line returns a lot of experience, and a lot of those guys graded out as plus value last year. You got nose tackle Caleb Banks, Cam Jackson, Tyreek Sapp. Those guys along the front, I think, are due for some improvement, and they weren't quite nearly as bad as I think everyone thought last year. But we have some depth that's banged up in the preseason. So the big question for me is, yeah, the starters are pretty good. The starters are better, I should say, but does Florida have the depth, especially when looking at this schedule? And we'll get into the schedule in just a bit because that's a very, very big component of the outlook on this team. As far as the linebackers, Shamar James is a very nice returner at linebackers. The only guy in the linebacker room was graded as a plus value player last year. You got sophomore Grayson Howard, who is the projected starter middle linebacker, but this is where Florida needs guys to step up here. I'd say the linebacker room is a little bit shaky underneath Shamar James. And then in the secondary, you got Jason Marshall coming back at corner. A lot of starts under his belt. Can he take a big jump in his 4th year as a starter? Not necessarily lived up completely to the hype so far as a 5-star, but maybe in his last year he can finally take that bump. You got Devin Moore, great coverage, great guy coming back, and then you have Jordan Castell at safety. He returns, showed some promise, and was one of the highest graded amongst the safety room. And in addition to that, you brought in transfer Asa Turner from Washington, and then Sharif Denson also in the mix, sort of an unknown with only 47 snaps under his belt last year. So the big thing here for the defense is that I think that there's a lot of shuffling of the deck, but will it be better than last year? They got rid of a lot of position coaches, and you have Austin Armstrong, a defensive coordinator. Very bright guy. Heard a lot of great things about him, but I don't think the players last year necessarily understood the defense. Maybe a little too complicated for them. So we'll see. We'll see how this can mesh in year 2, if it does mesh at all. But that's the big question mark for me, at least with this team. So overall, offensively, I expect mild improvement from last year with most guys returning. Don't know if there's a huge upside here though with Mertz at quarterback. And I think Lagway perhaps just a little too young to see a huge uptick in offense from last year. And then the defense, like I just said, is the 2nd year under Armstrong. Is there a positive or negative outlook there? Zan, before I get into my model, I'll let you take over the schedule here. You run us through the schedule before I give my final synopsis here on the Gators.
I mean, the
Yes,
Gators have
just laugh.
notorious.
Just laugh.
This, I mean, the Gators fans know all too well that they're notorious for one thing this year. They are known for having the absolute most brutal schedule in all of college football, maybe in the history of college football, because this schedule
It's the worst schedule I've ever seen, I think.
it's pretty dang tough, man. So you start non-con against Miami, who this year's got Cam Ward, and they're looking pretty good this year, better than years past. Then you get Samford, okay, but don't forget Samford kind of like what? Didn't they drop like a 40 piece on Florida one year, or something like that?
Yeah, that was
They
Mullins last year. Yep.
yeah, and then you got Texas A&M, who we expect to be better under Elko. Then you go at Mississippi State, which that's one of the games you should win, but of course that's an away game, so that complicates things. Then you get a bye week to play UCF, who's no, they're not new, they've been around. They have the potential to beat you if you're not on your A game. You go at Tennessee, then you play Kentucky, who's had your number here in recent years. Then you go bye week to prepare for Georgia, Probably not going to go your way. Then you go at Texas, then you play LSU, then you play Ole Miss, and then you play Florida State. That is brutal. There is a reason that the Florida Gators have a line of 5. It's not because they're a bad team, it's because their schedule is just atrocious. The Florida Gators have a pretty decent team here. If you park them, and not even park them, you can keep them in the SEC. If you just give them a more favorable SEC draw, we're talking about a team that's going bowling here at the very least. Now it makes things much more difficult when you look at this schedule. And I'm telling you, man, the Gators are going to be in a lot of close ones this year. So it's you as a Florida Gator fan. Tell us how you feel. Over or under, Shoe? Where are we going?
Oh, there's going to be a lot of close games and probably a lot of losses baked in there, but it'll be fun at least because we're playing all of our rivals. But my model, which basically my model, I take a synopsis, an aggregate of a bunch of public data out there. It gives me a win total that it spits out, and that is usually my biggest guidance for which way I go here on these over under win totals. My model has Florida at 5.9 wins. So the model actually likes Florida a lot. The model has Florida power rated as a top 25 team. I think it has Florida power rated as like number 22. So like on paper, it has it as a top 25 caliber team, but 5.9 wins is better than the win total for sure. It's almost a full game over. So the model is very optimistic, I'd say, on Florida. 6-6 with this schedule, I mean that's a pretty good that's a pretty good team. That's a pretty good result in my opinion. I'll take that. But I was looking at it and I really do truly think that this Florida team is better than what most people perceive them to be. I mean, Florida lost a few close games last year that they could have won, i.e. the Missouri game last year. They were in that game, they had it in the bag, lost at the very end, and just poor defensive mishaps and miscues. And I think a lot of Florida's problem is just, bad just mental blunders and things that are definitely fixable with proper coaching, special teams errors, things like that. It's remains to be seen if that can get fixed. But at the end of the day, my model is 5.9 wins, and I don't know if the model is taking into account the brutality of the schedule because I think you have to bump that number down a little bit just because, especially once you get in that end, that last 5 game stretch, like the defensive line, yeah, starters are pretty good, huge questions in the depth. At that point in time, by the time they get to the Ole Miss game, by the time they get to Florida State, by the time they get to LSU, is this team going to be all banged up and bruised? Is Mertz even going to be healthy? Is Lagway starting? Like, who knows, man? Who knows what this team is going to look like at the end of the year with injuries and everything, just from having to play like these teams that are some of the best in the country. I personally took over 4.5 wins with my personal money. It was one of my favorite bets. I think if the line was at 4.5, I would be strong over here. But I'm just going to go with a low confidence over here at 5. I think 5 is a tougher line. But I do truly think that 6 wins is possible. I like that we have push insurance here. Like I said, if we had 4.5, I'd go over with strong confidence, personal money on that. But at 5, I'm going to go over with low confidence. I do truly believe that this team can get to 6 wins, but 5-7 seems like, and I've gone through this bajillion times in my head throughout the offseason. I feel like 5-7 is going to be the final record here, which 5-7 with this schedule is not a bad team, which is crazy. So, what do you say, Zan?
I mean, like you said, Shu, you have them power rated top 25, and I don't disagree with that synopsis at all. I mean, Florida actually does have a pretty good roster. People say, like, well, how come they only have a line of 5 wins? It's the schedule, man. Like, you can you can be top rated, what, top 20, and then if you draw this schedule, it's not going to go too good for you. I mean, there's just no way that you'd be able to make it out of this schedule without getting scathed at least one, two, or three times. The Florida Gators have a lot of work ahead of them, but I'm kind of with you, Shub. I think it's more likely that we see them win 5, maybe even sneak a sixth, than they go under and get 4 wins or less. I'm going to go lean over, push to over. But I'm going to go at it with low confidence. But my thing is, they play Miami. It's early season. Even though they got Cam Ward and they're looking better, it's early season. It's in the swamp. I think they can win that game. Then Samford is going to be a win. Texas A&M, it's under Elko, but it is year one under Elko. I feel like that's a game they can win too. They're also at home. Then you go at Mississippi State. That's a winnable. And then I think Tennessee and Kentucky are both winnable games. So Their line is going to be really determined by this early season schedule because then, of course, you get the bye week to prepare for the gauntlet of Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida State. And honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if they went 1-4 in that stretch. I think they could steal one from somebody in that stretch. Who it's going to be, I couldn't really tell you. Probably Ole Miss or Florida State, more than likely. Um, but we'll see, man. I mean, Florida's a good enough of a team that if any of those teams in that last five are napping, maybe aside from Georgia, they could probably beat them. So we'll see, man. And because of that, I find it really hard to go under on the Florida Gators. I think 5-7, like you, is probably where it's going to be. But I think 6-6 is more likely than 4-8. So we're going over.
Hey, sports books are pretty good at what they do. So I think 5-7 is sounds about right. But yeah, a lot of people, before we move on, I think a lot of people think Billy Napier could get fired this year. And I don't believe that, honestly. I think that Billy Napier is going to get a fourth year unless this just like becomes a complete disaster. And I don't think that will happen. I think this team is definitely improved. I think Napier is going to get a fourth year, but you'll find a lot of people out there that would probably take under because of the idea that Napier might get canned mid-season and the team quits, especially for that last stretch. If that does happen, that last stretch is going to be a nightmare. But personally, I think Napier is getting the fourth year, but we don't have time to talk into the details of why that is. Let's move on, man. We got a lot of teams to cover. Georgia Bulldogs next up on the docket, the arch rival. We're heading to the opposite side of the cocktail party and heading to Georgia. And the Bulldogs sitting there with a win total of 10.5 wins, slight shade to the over at -130 on Caesars. Georgia and Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart enters his ninth season at Georgia, which is, now that time is ticking by, that's pretty good time that he's been there now. Next year, it will mark his 10th season, a full decade there in Athens. 13-1 last year. They had that heartbreaking SEC championship game loss to Alabama last year, undefeated last year in the regular season. Granted, last year's schedule was kind of a joke, but this year, very much a different case. We'll get into that. But Georgia, I think really is I think last year is a good example of why the 12-team playoff, I think, really does benefit teams like Georgia because last year, I think if that Georgia team was able to sneak back into the playoff with an expanded field, I think they could have done some damage. And I think there was an argument to be made that Georgia was just as good as Michigan and Washington, if not better than the national champion last year. But of course, they didn't win their conference and they got left out of the 14 playoff. It's just how the dominoes fell. But, on paper, this is a pretty darn good team, man. Take us away on the dogs.
A big shocker, man. The Dogs have a good team. I mean, this is it's basically Georgia has become, what Nick Saban's Alabama used to be. I mean, like Georgia is always that team that we expect to be the cream of the crop nowadays. The line shows it. They're over there at 10.5 with juice to the over, man. So that tells you what the sports book thinks about, you're the Georgia Bulldogs here. Now, of course, you've got Carson Beck coming back. I mean, the dude had almost 4,000 yards last year, 4-1 on the ratios. Really good. He's been really productive. He's got good protection. They get Trevor Etienne from the Gators, the other side of the cocktail party, and that's going to be a really good addition for them at running back. And they also have Roger Robinson backing him up there. You got Dominic Lovett coming back, a few young guys. You bring in London Humphreys and Colby Young, who were some solid transfers. They have a good little tandem of guys to mix up in there. So they lost Brock Bowers. I mean, that's kind of a big loss, and they lost Lad McConkey. But ultimately, I mean, this is the Georgia Bulldogs, man. They're still going to be pretty dang good. Their offensive line, they lost some pieces there, but they still have some pretty dang good pieces there. Highly recruited, highly touted. I really expect this to still be a pretty dang good offensive line, despite people getting drafted off this line like Amarius Mims. Um, we look over at the defensive side of the ball, man. D line looks pretty good. I mean, it has good depth. Not really shocked. You got Warren Brinson as your Stackhouse, Michael Williams, Chaz Chambliss, and other depth pieces. Of course, this is nothing new with the Georgia Bulldogs. Always riches on riches. And then, when they go into recruiting, man, it's like a pirate and they take all the plunder. Just straight riches. I'll tell you this. We look back, though, and I see the linebacker group. The linebacker group is probably one of the, I'm not going to say a bad group. It's probably still a pretty good group, but it's a group that needs to show something, okay?
For
And I
Georgia
have no doubt that
standards.
they will. For Georgia standards, absolutely. For Georgia standards, this is not a linebacking group that you're accustomed to. It's not a N'Kobe Dean or like a Channing Tindall or anything like that, you know? So we will need to see a little bit of step up at that level, which I think they're going to get pretty solid play out of that level. But to what extent, that remains to be seen. Then you go back to the secondary. They've got some corners who are going to have to step up here because they've lost some guys. And then you've got a safety in Malachi Starks coming back. Really like him. He grades out very well. And you know what? The Bulldogs here, expect them to be a very good team as usual, but I don't expect them to be the juggernaut that we're accustomed to seeing. I expect them to be dang good, top five team, but I don't expect it to be kind of a clear cut. It's Georgia, maybe like Ohio State and everyone else, kind of like how most years it's like two teams and everyone else. I think it's a wider field this year, and I don't think Georgia is that much farther ahead of some of the other teams in the field this particular season. Now, let's jump into the schedule. What's this mean for the line of 10 and a half? They play Clemson. I think they win that game. I'm not really concerned with that. Clemson, I do think will be a little bit better than they were last year, but at the same time, I think Georgia's a notch above Clemson and Dabo's ways of, Dabo's ancient ways of praying to the gnomes in his garden. And then Tennessee Tech, you're gonna beat Tennessee Tech. That's a beatdown. That's an exhibition. You're gonna go at Kentucky, which we'll see. I really like what Kentucky has defensively this year. Brock Vandegrift revenge game, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see what he looks like coming out. I mean, he's a very limited sample, but he was a former five-star, former Georgia Bulldog. They'll probably win that game though. Then you go bye week. You go at Alabama. That's an intriguing game because you get a bye week to prepare for Alabama. And yes, it's not a Nick Saban Alabama, but it's a Kalen DeBoer Alabama. And just like Nick Saban, Kalen DeBoer is a certified winner. I mean, the record speaks for itself, man. I don't have it remember off the top of my head, but it's like video game numbers. Kalen DeBoer. And Kalen DeBoer is playing like NCAA 25 on easy mode right now.
Hmm.
He's playing on rookie, and we'll see if the level has stepped up for him. But this is kind of a wash for me because yes, Georgia has the bye week to prepare for this game, but it's at Bama. It's in Tuscaloosa. So this is going to be a really tough game, and I'm really looking forward to this one. This is one that I cannot definitively give to Georgia for obvious reasons. Then you get Auburn, and you're a notch above Auburn. You get Mississippi State, you're a notch above Mississippi State. Then you go at Texas. That could be a tough one. Texas has a lot coming back this year. There's a lot of talent. And what's kind of like Georgia, yes, they actually did have a decent number of guys drafted, but at the same time, they have just as much talent, just back on the back end. Their third stringers even more talented than some like just other power four teams in general. I mean, they're just stacked on stacked on stacked. So the Alabama game, the at Alabama and the at Texas really concern me though for this shoe because at the 10 and a half, say one fumble or a Carson Beck interception or something along the lines happens here, we could be looking at 10-2 if that
Yeah.
happens between those two matchups. But when I look at this schedule shoe, I think those are the only two matchups that maybe scare me. Potentially Ole Miss. I mean, Lane Kiffin's going to want them. Bye week to prepare for the cocktail party. They're probably going to beat Florida. They're not a notch above Florida. You go at Ole Miss. That's the only one I can see maybe because it's at Ole Miss as well. They had that home field advantage. That's the thing that really worries me about this shoe. Georgia being at 10 and a half, despite how good they are, all of their games that I could actually see them potentially losing are away games. All their games that I can see them, and I'm not counting Clemson because Clemson I think they're a touch
No.
above, and I think they're going to beat Clemson. But I look at Alabama, I look at Texas, and I look at Ole Miss, and I say, "Oof, that's tough."
The three
Could Georgia
toughest
go
games
to
are all the way.
exactly? And I say, "Hey, you get." And then, like before this, look, you get a bye week to prepare for Bama. That's awesome. You get Mississippi State to prepare before Texas. So there are some benefits to this schedule. Bye week, lackluster opponent, and then I mean you got cocktail party before Ole Miss. That's a rivalry. We'll see what Florida looks like at that time. If Florida's actually doing good coming out of their bye week before that gauntlet, this could be a good game. It could actually like fight them here, but we'll see. It's going to depend a lot in Florida. But with that being said, Shub, I can already tell you right now I'm going to come at this with low confidence, okay? Because of the scenarios that I highlighted, and because of I'm a Georgia Bulldog believer. But despite being a Georgia Bulldog believer, I'm going to go under with low confidence. I think a 10-2 season is actually quite possible for the Georgia Bulldogs. And that doesn't mean they're not. I actually do think they will be in the SEC championship game at a 10-2 record. I think they can afford to take two losses in conference and still make it. And I think that is going to be the case for them. I do think somewhere between Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, I could see them, and maybe even Florida. If Florida has it together early season, I could see them slipping twice. This team is still dang good, but they are not the Georgia. They're not like, it's not one of those years, like I said, where I considered it Georgia and like everyone else. I feel like Georgia has kind of tiered down into some of these other teams just for this particular season. And we'll see, man. Georgia could very well end up going 11-1 or 12-0, but I'm going to go ahead and say I think 10.5 is perfect by the sports books. Absolutely. They're so good at this, man. And that's why I'm going to go under with very low confidence.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm a bit higher on this team, honestly. I do agree with you that if you're gonna poke holes in the team and say, hey, there's some questions, it's probably the linebacker room, but I think it's one of those things where you kind of just have to trust Kirby Smart in the defensive development. I mean, yeah, they do get the best recruits, but they also develop them really well and churn out draft picks. So it's a minor concern there, but I really like the defense, man. They were 11th last year in efficiency. I think they take a step forward. I think it has potential to finish inside the top five this year. So I think the defense is going to get back to some of the better ones that Kirby Smart and Georgia have had, and that's primarily because of the defensive line with Mikael Williams and Nazir Stackhouse and those guys coming back. Lots of good experience up front. And then along the offensive line, I know they do lose Amarius Mims to the first round, but the tackles that they got coming back, I expect progression from both of those guys. Interior is already solid. So when you talk in lines of scrimmage, I think they have a chance to be better just overall on both sides of the trenches than they were last year. And that's really important, especially with this schedule. And secondly, I mean, you got Carson Beck. Listen, Carson Beck, in terms of comparing him to the quarterbacks last year, he was probably what, the sixth, seventh, eighth best quarterback in college football last year. But this year, because Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, etc., Penix, Bo Nix, they're all gone. So now this year, you can make the argument that Carson Beck is the best quarterback in college football. I don't know if I agree with that per se, but I do think he's definitely one of the best. He's one of the top guys, and I mean he's just a solid, efficient quarterback. And I think that that's something for Georgia. You don't need a Jaden Daniels or a Michael Penix, but if you have a guy that can at least be a guy that just is good, that's good enough to win a national championship with the rest of this roster around him. And fortunately,
Georgia's AJ McCarron.
exactly. Georgia's AJ McCarron. I mean, I do think he's better than AJ McCarron. I mean, Beck is
I do
projected
too,
to go
yeah.
in the first round. Yeah, he is projected to go in the first round, but it's not like he's no Caleb Williams. We'll put it that way, but very solid. And again, you can make the case he is the best quarterback in college football this year. We'll see how that plays out. But anyways, my model loves Georgia. It loves Georgia. It loves the Bulldogs. It has Georgia at 11 and a half wins. My model thinks that Georgia is, you know how you're saying it's like Georgia and then a rung above, and then it's just a separation than everybody else. That's what my model thinks. My model thinks that Georgia is that team. The model thinks that Georgia is that guy, pal. So so I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. And if I look at this schedule, it literally has Georgia as no less than an 86% chance to win every single game on the schedule. Now, I do not believe that. I do not
It's
believe that whatsoever.
incredible. Wow.
That it loves Georgia. But the thing is, this schedule is very tough. I mean, it is a very tough schedule. The SEC, finally gave Georgia like a pretty damn tough schedule. And I know people a lot the last few years have been complaining like, oh, Georgia's got a cakewalk and stuff. And part of it is because like they don't have to play themselves. And that, the SEC East has been the weaker part of the division. So I grant you that, but the SEC just said, screw it. At Texas, at Ole Miss, at Bama. Go put your money where your mouth is right there. So so those people that have always been complaining that Georgia gets light schedules, this will finally be the chance. If Georgia goes 11-1 or 12-0 with this schedule, then all those people that are saying that they just win because they have easy schedules will can shut up because this is a
Oh,
tough
that's not
schedule.
true. It's a matter. Georgia always has like a really really good team, but when you add an easy schedule on top of it, it's just like insult to injury. It's like, man, so you're gonna give them this juggernaut squad, and then you're gonna have them play nobody? Like,
Yeah. So if they go 11-1 with this schedule, I mean That's pretty good. So I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna go at it with medium confidence actually. I'm still very high on Georgia. I think just having Beck and all these guys defense I think will take a big step forward. I think it's the recipe for me to get to 11 wins and I think of those big three that you talked about, Bama, Ole Miss and Texas. I don't know. We haven't gotten to Texas yet. I don't know. Texas does have a little bit of questions for me. Like, is the defensive line going to be quite as good as it was last year? Ewers, I think, maybe has hit a ceiling. I don't know how much better he can get. So I do think, even though it's at Texas, I do still think Georgia's better. And I do think Georgia's better than Bama. But Bama, of course, has DeBoer. You made great points. I mean, fair to say, I think they could split those games. Let's be conservative here to say they split those two. At Ole Miss, Ole Miss should be a lot better. But then again, if you look at last year, Georgia absolutely dominated Ole Miss. I mean, it was not even close.
Yeah.
They beat them by like 35. And I'm like, did Ole Miss just cover that gap in one off season? I don't know about that.
Let
I
me
have
ask you
to
this,
see it
Shoot.
to believe it.
What if Carson Beck goes down?
So that was my very next point before we move on here. My last point was yes, I'm going at this with medium confidence on the over because I think 11 and 1 will be the final record. However, the only reason why I'm not going under or why I'm not going at it with high confidence, I should say, is because I do see a path to an under, and the path to an under is a Beck injury because Gunnar Stockton and Jaden Rashada are very questionable. I don't know if those guys are it. I mean,
Rashada certainly isn't, or at least from what we've seen from
Rash
him.
Rashada's got an active litigation going against Billy Napier, and then Gunnar Stockton. I mean, I don't really know what to. We haven't seen much from him, so
Man, Rashada's meant to be a Georgia Bulldog, man. You got litigation against the rival in Florida.
yeah. So, but safe to say, a Beck injury. I think if you get a Beck injury, then all of a sudden, yeah, 9-3 or maybe 8-4. I don't know about that. I mean, even this roster is just too good. But if a Beck injury happens, then yeah, 9-3 is on the table. But I'm not gonna bank on that. I mean, these guys will protect them well, but we'll see. So I'm going over with medium confidence. Zan is on the under with low confidence. So an interesting little difference of opinion here on Georgia, and looking forward to seeing how it plays out because there's some big boys on this schedule this year. All right, moving on. Kentucky, the Wildcats, and Mark Stoops, who comes in back to Lexington for his 12th season at Kentucky. UK went 7-6 last year, and you know, Mark Stoops kind of took a. I'll say this: he was Texas A&M's head coach for about an hour, and then
True.
there was a lot of pushback on that, and then he was all of a sudden Kentucky's coach again. And if you're a Kentucky fan, you should be elated. You should be jumping for joy. I think that it is Mark Stoops is like one of the most criminally underrated head coaches in football, and I think that the fact that he does what he does at Kentucky, that was a historical bottom feeder program, is pretty remarkable. And secondly, the fact that public pushback is what prevented him from getting the A&M job, I think is just it's criminal. But he's Kentucky's head coach, so if you're a Kentucky fan, that's all you care about. And this year, at least on paper, I think there's reason for optimism. So take us away, Zan. The line is at 6.5 with a little juice to the over. So sportsbooks are expecting more of the same from Kentucky under Stoops in recent years.
Well, I'll tell you this, Shub. Their offense intrigues me because you have Brock Vandegrift as the projected starter, sure, and he was a former five-star, and so there could be a higher ceiling here in terms of quarterback play than we've seen in recent years, maybe with Devin Leary. But really, how high is that ceiling is the question here, or is it going to be more of the same? Even if it's, let's just say for the sake of argument, it's more of the same and it's about average QB play. Then you have at least some insurance with Gavin Wimsatt and Bo Allen. I mean, like you got like they're not elite quarterbacks, but you have at least experienced guys behind Vandegrift. That way, if things go tits up, there's at least someone in the wake that isn't going to completely collapse under pressure. But I'm thinking at least with Vandegrift, it keeps things interesting to watch the Kentucky Wildcats. You may lose Ray Davis to the NFL, but you get Diamante Trainum from Ohio State. He was a highly touted guy. He just never really got his shot, never got to call his shot over there because of all the talented running backs they have at Ohio State. So we'll see if he's able to, get it going here at Kentucky, and I think Kentucky's going to use him pretty heavily. And then they'll get Demi Sumo Carnaby. I probably botched
Good
that,
luck on
but
that one.
anyway, yeah, good luck on that one. But he's going to be in the mix as well, getting some carries, but it's probably going to be mostly the Ohio State transfer. In terms of wide receivers, man, you got Barron Brown coming back, you got Dane Key coming back, and then you got Jamori Macklin coming in from North Texas, who's a 1,000-yard receiver with 11 tutties. Between all these guys, you've got over 20 touchdowns and 2,000 yards of returning production. I really like that. There's some potential here for Brock Vandegrift. There is definitely potential for this offense to take a step forward, and it completely depends on the QB play, of course. We look at the offensive line; they do return their best offensive linemen in terms of grades, and Marquise Cox. They've got a couple of other transfers on this line, but otherwise, man, this line doesn't grade out too well. I think it's going to be average at best, maybe even slightly below average, especially for SEC, especially for like what we expect from an SEC offensive line. They're a little bit lacking in that department,
They were
unfortunately.
last in the SEC in line yards last year, believe it or not. That's been a big problem for
Yeah,
them. So if they are average, that means they took a massive jump forward. But
exactly. So in terms of like Power Four, they might be average or slightly below average, but in terms of SEC, they're going to be pretty back there in terms of how good their O line is, which is pretty big in some of these games. We know how important lines of scrimmage are, but there is a saving grace to this, Shube, because there is the potential for them to raise the ceiling on the offense because of the unknown in Brock Vandegrift and some of the weapons that they brought in. But what I really like is their defense, because their defense is going to keep them in games this year. That defensive line is really good, Shube. This defensive line, they've got Deion Walker coming back. You've got Keyshawn Silver, former five-star, coming back. You return Trayvon Typka and JJ Weaver. I mean, and they've got good rotation guys. At the next level, you bring in Jason Dumas Johnson from Georgia, and then you return Derek Jackson, who grades really well. So that front seven is just loaded, man. That front group is going to be so formidable. And then we look at the corners. You return Maxwell Hairston, who grades out really well. You return Jonquise Hardaway. And then you bring in DJ Waller from Michigan. Despite losing Andrew Phillips to the NFL, you still got good guys there. The only thing that is a little bit concerning is their safeties. Their safeties are definitely the weakest part of this defense, and they don't grade out very well. They're going to have to step up. But otherwise, man, this defense is awesome. Like, this is a great defense. It's going to be, I wouldn't be shocked if this is a top 25 unit this year. And that's a huge leap because they weren't very efficient last year, believe it or not, especially for Kentucky standards. They were sub 60, I believe, in terms of defensive efficiency. So I can see them taking a leap here, if not top 25, at least top 40, which is definitely enough to keep them in games. They were 33rd in offensive efficiency last year, Shub, and I feel like they didn't even have some of the weapons that they have this year. It's going to be, again, dependent on quarterback play. But if Vandegrift can even play to like Leary level, we could see them maybe creep into the top 25 in terms of offensive efficiency. So I think Kentucky is sneakily a pretty good team this year. Mark Stoops, man, like the line is sitting there at 6.5, and I think this team got better than it did last year. Okay, so we look at the schedule. Southern Miss, they're going to win that game. South Carolina, I think South Carolina is actually a little bit better this year as well. That one's kind of toss-up territory for me. But you're at home. I kind of lean in your favor there. But South Carolina, I do like a little bit this year. Then Georgia's going to be an L. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I mean, like come Georgia week, you might as well start prepping for Ole Miss. Um, just kidding. Never do that. But then you got Ohio after that.
Auburn
You
does
should,
that.
yeah. Then you got Ohio after that. You should beat Ohio. So cool. We're looking at 2, maybe even 3 wins here if things go your way against South Carolina. You go at Ole Miss. I think, obviously, I would favor Ole Miss in this matchup, but I do think that there is the ability here, if this offense takes that jump and this defense takes that jump, that they could come away against Ole Miss and beat them. They're a well enough coached team with Mark Stoops. You and I are both very high on Mark Stoops. They brought in Bush Hamden from Boise State to be the OC, so we'll see what he can do for them. So that one, I lean Ole Miss, but I'm not going to definitively say Kentucky's going to lose that game. Then you get a bye week to prepare for Vandy. Oh man, a bye week well spent, right? Okay, you should beat Vandy. Okay, then you go at Florida. Historically, have kind of had Florida's number to this point in the season, or to this point in recent years, I should say. But it's in the swamp. So kind of lean potentially in Florida's favor here, depending on what their season looks like. if Florida is kind of like already in the weeds from early in the season, this Florida team, especially preparing for that 5 game gauntlet we talked about with them towards the end, they could already be in quit alert. So this is definitely a toss-up kind of game for me. Then Kentucky gets Auburn. I think they're a notch above Auburn. I think they can beat them. You go at Tennessee. I think that's a winnable game for Kentucky. I won't say definitively. I'll call that a toss-up. Then you go bye week, you get Murray State. That's going to be a win. You go at Texas. I think you probably lose that. And then you get Louisville, which you won last year, which I definitively called the Snake Whale Showdown. And I was made wrong on that because both Kentucky teams looked pretty good. But anyways, that's going to be a tough game for you too because you've got Jeff Brom, but you are at home. And I would lean in your favor in that game. So with that being said, Shu, I mean, I look at it. Southern Miss, potentially South Carolina, Ohio, Vandy, Murray State, and then I say between Auburn, Florida, Tennessee, and Louisville, I think they can go 2-2 in that stretch. I mean, that's like I can easily see them winning 7, maybe even 8 games on this schedule. Shoe. I'm gonna go over. I'm gonna go at it with medium confidence. I like the Kentucky Wildcats this year.
Over with medium confidence. All right. Yeah, I share a lot of the optimism, especially on defense, man. I mean, just up front, Deion Walker, I mean, he could be a top 5 pick in the draft. If not, he's going to be a top 10 pick. A lot of great defensive players going in the draft this year, but Deion Walker is going to be one of the first names called off the board. I'm with you. I think if there's one thing Kentucky, which I don't understand, is how did Georgia let Jamon Dumas Johnson go? Because we're looking at Georgia and you're like, maybe there's questions of the linebacker room. You could make the argument Kentucky's linebacker room might be just as good as Georgia. So there's one thing that you can be like, hey, Kentucky might be near Georgia's level in one unit. It's linebacker. And Dumas Johnson is a projected day 2 guy. So I'm just a little confused by that.
I
But
mean, shoot, their front seven or their front six, however they're gonna play
yeah,
it,
front
is
6.
insane.
It is.
Insane. Like it's so good. Like,
And that's
Kentucky is
why
going to be so formidable this year.
I think this defense, I'm with you, Zan. I wrote it down too. I said I expect them to jump in the top 25, and that's a conservative estimate. I expect them to be in the top 25 minimally. If not, I think there's upside for them to be like a top 15 defense at the end of the year because of the step forward I expect them to take. And even the corners too. I think the one room you can point to as maybe that's a weakness is the safety room, but their corners are good as well. I think they're very solid. So I really do like this defense a lot, and I think it's going to be the better of the two sides of the football for sure. I'm still, I wouldn't say skeptical, but I am definitely Brock Vandegrift in the offense. It leaves a lot more questions unanswered than answered for me, and I think that is why I'm hesitant here with this total. He's only thrown 21 career passes and he's looked solid, but in those 21 passes, but most of those are in garbage time playing with Georgia. So it's like, I don't really know how much stock you can put into that. But like you said, former 5-star guy, the offensive line has to be better than it was last year, but it's still not going to be the greatest, I think. I don't know if this is going to just take this massive jump forward, but we'll see. So I look at the offense and I think it's going to probably regress, I think, if anything, because listen, I think Devin Leary, he was banged up last year, definitely didn't show out, but he was good enough to give Kentucky a high floor on offense last year. It's a huge unknown with Brock Vandegrift, and I could be wrong. If Vandegrift ends up being pretty good, then I'm definitely on the over here. But
I don't
if
know.
Vandegrift,
I feel like if Vandegrift is even just like close to Leary's level, I think this offense is going to take a step forward.
that's fair. I don't know. I do think that it's possible for it to take a step back and schedule adjusted efficiency, but you're probably right. I think even with most of the guys around him coming back, offensive lines depth probably improving, and wide receivers, they got to have some guys step up, which I think will happen.
I mean, they have pretty good
It's
receivers. I would definitely like what they have there.
Yeah, they just don't have that one alpha guy, but they probably will take a step forward. It's Brock Vandegrift for me. He's the X factor. I know quarterback X factor. Yeah, that's the easy thing to say, but I do think it's really true with this team. So my model has 6.3 wins, which is sort of right on the nose here with the over under win total. Having 8 home games helps. That's one thing I think is going in Kentucky's favors. I got 8 home games this year, so you're playing 2/3 of your schedule at home, which is great. You got Southern Miss, Ohio, Vandy, Murray State in the
They're
bank,
they're pulling
and
a Big Ten.
They are pulling a Big Ten, and of their toss-up games, I have four toss-ups: South Carolina, Auburn, Louisville, and Florida, and three of those four at home as well, which is very favorable. I think this schedule sets up very, very favorably for Kentucky. Most of their toss-ups are at home. They got some easy wins in the bag in non-con. You got Vanderbilt on the schedule, which is great, and their bye weeks are evenly spaced apart. I mean, I think that I was originally going under here just because I was just like 6.3. I was flipping a coin, but screw it. I'm going to go over. I'm going to go over. I do think Kentucky can get it, but I'm going to go with low confidence here. So, and the only reason I'm flipping is because there's more unders that are ahead. So I got to go over here. I can't just be under on every single team, but I do think Kentucky can get to 7-5 in the regular season, and even with the new format, this is a pretty good team. And from the most part, I've heard good things about Vandy, so we'll move on. All right. Moving on. South Carolina. A lot to cover here. Still three more teams to go. South Carolina comes in with a win total of 5.5 wins. A little juice to the over there at minus 140 on Caesars. Shane Beamer is entering his fourth season in Columbia. 5-7 last year, a little bit of a down year after a very tumultuous 2022 year. I wouldn't say tumultuous is the best word. I would say very surprising 2022 season, a little bit of a breakout. That was a fun year for Gamecock fans. Pulled off a few upsets there at the end, but a little bit of a step back last year. And Shane Beamer is sort of a potential hot seat candidate. I don't know if the seat is very hot because I do think that he's doing a good job in recruiting, and there are some reasons for optimism long term at least. But he is a guy that, potentially could be let go if things don't go well here for South Carolina. The win total's at 5.5, so you're going to be on edge for a bowl game, it looks like this year. What do you think, Zan? What's your assessment on the Gamecocks in year four under Shane Beamer?
I mean, with all this money coming in to the league shoe, I mean, any SEC or Big Ten job nowadays is a rough one because I mean, everyone in your conference is getting better. And it works for them as well. I mean, South Carolina, I think, did get better this year, but the only unknown, similar to Kentucky, is the quarterback play. Now, right now, I mean, Lenora Sellers, who's, I believe, a redshirt freshman, is projected to be their starter. And Shane Beamer really likes what he's seen from him in spring ball, said he looks really poised, feels comfortable with the offense. So it really looks like Lenora Sellers is probably going to beat out Robbie Ashford and certainly Davis Bevel, one of the worst quarterbacks of all time. I don't even know how he made a D1 roster again. But regardless, we'll go off the tangent. Um, but I really like what they added, Shu. I think South Carolina very quietly made very good transfer portal ads to make themselves give themselves added depth and be more formidable this year. They were very well balanced last year, surprisingly, Shub. Top 50 in both offensive and defensive efficiency. Barely, but they were there on both sides of the ball. Very consistent. Now, they weren't elite at anything, but they're just kind of an average team, just doing what they do. I think they have the potential, Shub, to definitely take a step forward this year on offense. It depends on the quarterback play. Well, obviously, right? But every other position, I could argue that you potentially upgraded. At the running back spot, you got Raheem Sanders, and he was banged up last year. He's from Arkansas, but man, we know when he is healthy, he is a great running back, very dynamic. He's had a 1,000-yard season in his past. Then you bring in Oscar Attaway from North Texas, who's a 700-yard rusher. You've got two guys in the books right there to share the ball, maybe take some of the load off Raheem, keep him healthy. I like what they have there. Then you bring in Gage Larvadane from Miami of Ohio, who's a close to 700-yard guy. You bring in Jared Brown from Coastal, who is a 700-yard guy. And then you bring in Dale Von Kemble from Nevada, who's a 600-yard guy. And then, of course, you have Nick Harbor, who's like an athletic freak who they really like, and he's a young guy. So, I mean, you've got a good little tandem of receivers here who have experience. So there's certainly an opportunity here. And then you've got a good running back to kind of give your quarterback and these receivers some time to kind of gel and take some of the pressure off of them. Another thing that we were kind of critical on last year with South Carolina was this offensive line. We expected this offensive line to be absolutely terrible, and it still wasn't that great. But they returned four starters this year, and they also added a lot of portal depth. So there's going to be a good little rotation there. I expect this offensive line still not be great, but better than last year's Shube. I do expect this offensive line to be better than it was last year. We looked on the opposite side of the ball. They bring in Kyle Kennard from Georgia Tech, who's a pretty solid player. They bring in Gilbert Edmond from FSU, who's a pretty average player. They return Tonka Hemingway, really big return, really good player. And then they have another 2 to 3 guys in their rotation who are very, very solid. So I actually really like their D line. I think they're very deep at that position to have pretty solid play. Then we look back at the linebackers. They've got Debo Williams coming back and Bam Martin Scott. And then they have some good portal ads in Bengali Kamara from Pitt and Demetrius Knight from Charlotte. I think they've got good depth at the linebacker spot. I really like the rotation they have there too. This is another team kind of similar to Kentucky, who I think has a pretty good front group of defenders. Then we look back at the corners and the safeties, the secondary. O'Donnell Fortune comes back. He's a pretty average player in terms of grades. And then the rest of the corners is where it gets a little iffy because they're very young guys. They're all like redshirt sophomores and things of that nature. So we'll see if they can step up. They haven't really been battle tested yet. This is going to be something that's going to be make or break for the secondary. And then I will say for the safeties, I really like what they have there, man. They have a lot of experienced guys coming in, including portal ads, especially Gerald Kilgore from Tennessee State, who grades pretty damn good per PFF standards. So I think there is the potential for this defense to actually be pretty dang solid, Shub. They were my numbers are top 50 in defensive efficiency last year. I could see this group moving up and maybe to the top 35. And if the offense is able to at least stay in the top 50, you've got a formidable team here. And I fully see that for the Gamecocks. I do see improvement. But like we say all the time, Shub, when we talk about win totals, just because your team improved doesn't mean your win total is going to improve. The schedule matters. And with that being said, let's jump into the schedule. Old Dominion, that's a win. At Kentucky, I think I like both teams, man. But I kind of lean towards Kentucky there just because Kentucky's at home. But that one I have in toss-up territory. You get LSU, you probably lose that game. You get Akron, you probably win. So we're starting 2-2, 3-1 at best, but at least 2-2. We go on a bye week. You get a bye week to prepare for Ole Miss, and you're at home. That's actually pretty awesome for you because that's one of the games that you're going to have to win if you're trying to like really do something in the SEC this year. That one I at least give you like probably like a 35% chance to win coming off the bye week. Then you go at Bama. That's going to be tough, probably an L. You go at Oklahoma. We'll see what Oklahoma looks like if they've adjusted to SEC ball. I don't really know how to gauge Oklahoma and Texas as of right now. I think Texas is going to acclimate a little better than OU in year one, but we'll see. And then you get a bye week to prepare for Texas A&M. These bye weeks are actually pretty nice, Shu, because these bye weeks are against some of these teams that, if all these pieces come together, they could potentially beat these teams. And yes, I know how good Ole Miss is. But I do think at home off a bye week, if these pieces are clicking, there's potential to beat them. At home against Texas A&M off a bye week, if everything's clicking, I think there's potential to beat them. Then you get at Vandy, that's a win. You get Missouri, you get Wofford, that's a win. And then at Clemson at the end of the year, man, what's Clemson going to be at the end of the year if their season's kind of falling apart already? We both expect Clemson to be an ACC contender this year, but to what degree? To what degree? Are they going to be in the college football playoff conversation? Well, certainly if they win the ACC, but are they going to have to be one of those teams that has to win their conference to get in? And so we'll see. I think South Carolina could beat Clemson, but the thing that goes against them is that it's at Clemson this season. So with that being said, the line's 5.5, Shub. And I know I've been babbling, been going on and on, but I look at Old Dominion, Akron, Wofford. That's 3 guarantees. You got Vandy. That's basically 4 right in your bag. I'd be shocked if you lose any of those 4. And so I just need 2 more on this schedule. And between what I got Kentucky, Texas A&M, maybe Oklahoma in the right circumstances, maybe Clemson. Oh, it's tough, Shub. It's tough. But I do think South Carolina is going to improve this year. I'm going to go South Carolina is going to go bowling at 6-6. Low confidence to the over.
Going through that internal battle in your head, that's exactly what happened to me when I went through the schedule. Yeah, I had a hard time with this team too. I think 5.5 is perfect. It's right on the fence of what I'm thinking here. But I don't know. I'm still questionable in a lot of areas for this team here. Yeah, the offensive line was pretty bad last year. It's probably going to be better, but You have two new offensive tackles that are both young and inexperienced. One of them is a true freshman, high 4-star recruit in Josiah Thompson. It's Is he going to get thrown into the fire in the first season and just click immediately? That's I think to be seen there. I'm a little skeptical, but we'll see, especially against a lot of this SEC competition. And on the other side of the ball, yes, the defensive line I think for sure will get better than it was last year. The defensive line will be better. It was one of the worst in the SEC last year. But you got guys like you highlighted, Tonka Hemingway coming back, Kyle Kennard from Georgia Tech, and then you have true freshman 5-star Dylan Stewart, who's going to start at defensive end. So South Carolina is already putting two of their true freshmen from this past year's recruiting class to work. They're throwing them in the fire, both sides of the trenches on day one. So that's pretty cool to see. But how is that going to hold up as true freshmen in the SEC in their first years? I think it's a little uh, I don't know. I'm still skeptical on how much more improved these they're going to be on both sides of the trenches. And then as far as the quarterback situation, man, I gotta see it to believe it because I this is the way I look at this with Lenora Sellers. Listen, he's getting a lot of hype. I know I've heard a lot of good things about him. I know South Carolina fans are excited. Beamer's been praising him. It's kind of a completely different change of style from what you had last year because Lenore Sellers is only throwing 4 career passes. Yeah, he's an explosive, exciting runner, but you had Spencer Rattler last year. Spencer Rattler was very underrated last year. He very quietly had a great season in South Carolina. I mean, he got drafted. He went to the NFL. I mean, the guy is an NFL quarterback. So and he was a pretty good passer last year. I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, Lenore Sellers and Robbie Ashford are a massive passing downgrade from Spencer Rattler. Yeah, they're better with the legs, but I think overall it's still a downgrade. I mean, I don't know. I'm still skeptical. I think with the offensive line still, I think being probably one of the worser offensive lines in the SEC, you're going to need to really rely on that for this run game, especially with the dynamic quarterbacks. I don't know if this is going to work fully. I'm very skeptical if this is going to work offensively, but we'll see. If Lenore Sellers ends up being better than I think he's going to be, then I'm wrong, and this is for sure a bowl team. But I don't know. I'm still skeptical. Lenore Sellers, keep in mind he was only a 3-star rated recruit, and I know some guys end up being gems, but he was an 88 grade 3-star recruit just a year ago, so we'll see. We'll see how this plays out, but I am call me skeptical of this offense. Defense, overall, I think the defense will be better than last year, that is for sure. So my model actually is 6 wins. The model's a little bit higher on South Carolina, and the model's telling me this is a little bit of an overplay here, but listen, here's the schedule. I'm with you. ODU, Akron, Wofford, Vandy, 4 wins of the bank. Sure, 4 wins. Great. So you need two more at Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, at Bama, at Oklahoma, A&M, Missouri, at Clemson. That's tough, man. I don't know if I see 2 wins in that list of teams, especially with me being very questionable or having lots of questions with the offense. I just don't know if this offense is good enough to pull two of those upsets off. I know you got A&M, Missouri, Ole Miss, LSU at home. Kentucky, very winnable, but that's at Kentucky. I think my final tick here to the under, and it's a low confidence under here, is because that Kentucky game is pretty much a swing for my synopsis of South Carolina, Kentucky, and it's at Kentucky. So I was like, I got to go over on Kentucky, but I got to go under on South Carolina. I got to go one way or the other with these two teams. So because it's at Kentucky, that's my swing game here for this total. And I'm gonna have to go under with South Carolina, but it's very, very low confidence. And yeah, I mean, this team is very capable of pulling off at least two of those upsets in games they're not going to be favored in. And I think it's very possible they go to a bowl game. I mean, Beamer's got good culture and everything, and Lenore Sellers may actually be a gem, but I got to see it to believe it. I got to see it play out through an entire season, and I just think this offense is going to be very one-dimensional next year, and I'm just skeptical. But I'll rest my case there. So very low confidence on the under for me, but I think you and I both agree that we're right in the same area, just a little bit over that 5.5 for you, a little bit under the 5.5 for me.
I think Kentucky and South Carolina can be very interesting teams to watch this year because there really is potential for both these teams to kind of take a big step forward, but there's also potential for them really not to live up to that. So I think they're very interesting to watch, and I think the sports books. I mean, the sports books are sharp, man. I mean, South Carolina at 5.5 is perfect.
Exactly. Agreed. And they're not making our lives easier here doing these totals. Well, speaking of sports books and their totals, this one is very interesting here. Tennessee. Ball's got a win total of 9.5 wins, and there's a heavy side here. The
Yeah.
under is minus 215. The over is plus 175. Keep in mind, this is on Caesars. 9.5 is very high. This is the highest, I think, of Tennessee's win totals. And we just happen to be using Caesars here for the sake of consistency. But yeah, this just screams like this is Caesar's like dangling the carrot and being like, "Oh, you guys all like Tennessee. You all think Nico Iamaleava is a Heisman dark horse. Take this over. Look at this plus 175." And they're just hanging that out there, dangling the carrot for people like me that were going into this thinking, "Oh, I can't wait to bet over on Tennessee." And then they hang a 9.5 with a heavy juice to the under, give you the plus money, just hoping that you take the bait. And you know what? The reason why they're doing it, because when it's minus 215 on one side, this should be down at 9. I mean, this should be a 9, but they're doing this for a reason. And it's because they're stealing, in their minds, they're stealing money from some people. So, anyways, 9-4 last year for Tennessee. Josh Heupel has really elevated this program. 11-2 in 2022, and then 9-4 last year, and that was sort of a down year for them. Now you got Nico Iamaleava is ready to take the reins. He's got the keys to the Porsche. And Tennessee is a dark horse for a lot of people going into this year. What's your say, Zan?
There's things I like about Tennessee, but I'm just going to come out and say it, man. I'm going under with high confidence. I mean, there's look. So my part of my strategy here, when I assess these teams, is I look at the roster, I look at the schedule, and I come up with what I think the win total will be in my mind. That would make me think, "Ooh, I don't know. Here's my teetering point." And when it came to Tennessee, I was at 7 to 8. 7 to 8. Like so 7, I was thinking 7.5 would probably be the line. And when I saw this and I got on here and I said the line, I saw the line over here at 9.5. I said, yeah, I'm going under, man. That's like I already knew that's a heavy under for me. Because I could see Tennessee maybe getting to 8, but 9 if they get lucky, but no way are they getting to 10. Are you kidding me? This is very obvious for me, Shu. Nico Nico Iamaleava, man, I'm not even gonna try. I'm just gonna call him Nico. We got our new DJU,
Hey,
man. I'm
I
just
can
gonna
at
call him
least, yeah,
Nico.
we'll just call him Nico. I don't think everyone's gonna call him Nico, but I can at least say his last name better than DJU. I think. I think I at least have a shot to say his last name right, unlike DJU. So, but I still will go with Nico because it's just easier to
It's
say. But
just
yes,
easier. Nico, yeah, he's got potential, and even if he plays up, I think he certainly has the potential to definitely be better than Joe Milton. So that's a good thing for you. We might even be able to get back to the Hendon Hooker type offenses. And if you're able to get to that point, you're in business here. But you lose Jalen Wright. It's not all that bad because you do have Dylan Sampson, who's pretty efficient, and he wasn't getting the full workload last year. So I think he's going to be 1,000-yard rusher this year. But I look at their wide receivers. I do like Squirrel White. I do like the transfer from Tulane, Chris Brazel. But otherwise, it's just like I don't really know. I do like their two tight ends that they have as well. They're really big, athletic guys, but they don't really have the numbers as of right now. But they want to use those guys. It's going to create a lot of mismatches. So there's potential with this offense. But I look at the offensive line. They've got three returning starters, maybe average at best. They bring in a five-star or former five-star tackle from LSU in Lance Hurd. So I think there's potential for this offensive line to be pretty solid. So the offense could definitely do some work here, man. So it just depends on Nico. Shocker. It's how a lot of these teams are because a lot of teams this year, such as like Kentucky and South Carolina that we just talked about, have new quarterbacks. And so, of course, we kind of going in blind here, not really knowing what these quarterbacks are capable of. So that really kind of teeters on what this is. But there's a reason why that line is so high, and I think you're right, Shub. I think a lot of people, I think Caesar's just trying to get a lot of people to take that over because people think Nico's going to be that godsend. And sure, he could be, but in year one, I don't know about year one, Shub. I think it's going to take a year for him to get everything under his belt, get adjusted to this level of play. But Tennessee does have some things I really like. And for instance, one is the defensive line. Mainly because they have James Pierce, who might be the number one pick this year. I mean, James
yeah.
Pierce is legitimately going to go top 5 this year, barring an injury. And knock on wood, I don't want that to happen for him. He's a great player. But the rest of that line is about average per SEC standards. But you got James Pierce, so that makes your offensive line above or your defensive line above average. So let's leave it at that. Then we go back, we look at the linebacking unit. That one is a little bit of an unknown because the projected starters don't have a lot to really give me any gauge as to like how efficient they are or what the case may be with them. So they're kind of a toss up. I don't really know what to expect from that level, but I can probably expect at least average play, and that's where I'm going to go at for that for my assessment. In terms of corners in the secondary, they lost Kamal Haddon to the NFL, but they bring in some transfers like Jermod McCoy from Oregon State, who was a four-star transfer who graded about average on PFF. And then they bring in Jalen McMurray from Temple, who also graded roughly average on PFF. The one thing I really don't like about the secondary is their safety room, man. Their safety room is weak in terms of efficiency and playing their roles properly. This safety room really needs to grow for Tennessee to be able to take a jump. And so when it comes to their linebacking unit and their secondary, that concerns me, Shu, because there are a lot of teams in the SEC that can air this ball out. And I know you got a good pass. I know you got James Pierce, and you can put together a little bit of a pass rush here and help those guys. But ultimately, it looks like you might end up in more shootouts than you want to be in. And with a quarterback who's in his first year as the starter, I don't know how well that's going to work out for you. We look at the schedule here. You get Chattanooga. I think you win that. You get NC State, and I'm on record. Go back to ACC win totals. I'm on record picking NC State to win this game. And
That's
I
right.
know Vols fans, you're gonna hate me for this, but NC State's a damn good team, and I
It's a
really
toss
do.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, and if Tennessee wins this game, I mean, I tip my cap to you. It's going to be a close one. It's not going to be a dominant win by any stretch of the imagination. But I actually do think NC State is going to take this game. Then Kent State, you're going to win. You go at OU. That's an interesting game. I think that's winnable, but that's more of a toss-up, and it's also an away game. That's OU's SEC opener, so they're going to want to show out for that one. They don't want to lose. They want to like put their staple and everything. That's going to be a hard-fought game. Then you get a bye week to go at Arkansas. You're probably going to win that. You play Florida. That one's a little bit of a toss up. I mean, like we talked about how Florida has a tough schedule, but I think Florida can box with Tennessee this year. Then Bama, I think you probably lose that game. You get a bye week. You play Kentucky. It's huge that you get that bye week to play Kentucky. Okay, it's huge. You get Mississippi State next. You probably beat Mississippi State. You go at Georgia. You're probably going to lose. You get UTEP and Vandy to finish the year. You're probably going to win. But Shu, I don't see 10 wins there. I've got you losing to NC State. And even if you beat NC State, I mean, you still got to go at Oklahoma. You still got to play Florida, which is a rivalry. You still got to play Bama. You still got to play Kentucky. You still got to play Georgia. I mean, baked in, there are some losses. And if they go 10-2, I tip my cap to you, Josh Heupel and Nico. You guys absolutely destroyed it. There's just no way, though. There's no way. Under with very high confidence.
Yeah, very fair assessment there. I went into this very high on Tennessee, especially the offense. I do like Nico Iamaleava a lot, but yes, this line is way too high, and I'm gonna go under as well. I'm gonna go under with medium confidence, so I'll just put that out there for now. But here's the thing, and the only reason why I'm not going at this with high confidence like you is because I do think there is a path here to 10-2. That path to 10-2, if they get to 10-2, it's because Nico Iamaleava is sitting in the as a Heisman finalist in New York City at the end of the year. If
That is
that
true.
if that happens, then Tennessee could go 10-2. But that's a huge stretch. And I think Caesars is just doing something very unorthodox here with Tennessee, and they're probably doing it for a good reason. Because any other sports books, this would actually probably be more of a tougher assessment on the win total. Again, everything is relative. We do these win totals in relation, or we do these over under predictions in relation to the win total. From a general sense, I say Tennessee is for sure a playoff dark horse for the 12-team playoff. But yeah, I think the offense and the defense, I think they're going two separate ways here. It was a very balanced team last year, honestly, when it comes to schedule adjusted efficiency. 23rd offensively, 25th defensively. Well, I think that's going to change. I do think that there is huge upside potential with Nico at quarterback. If he ends up being the goods, I think this offense can end up being a top 10 at the end of the year. And one thing too is that you lose some receivers, but you got Squirrel Wright coming back, and Brew McCoy is finally healthy. Brew McCoy was injured for half of last year. So you got two of your best receivers coming back, and the offensive line. Here's the thing with the offensive line. Yeah, the guys graded not necessarily the best individually, but you look at the unit metrically, it was this tied for second last year in the SEC in line yards. So I think this is an example of where the sum is kind of greater than the individual parts, if that's the right saying. But I think that's a product of the system, and I feel like we've seen this is when some things don't add up, and usually what happens is units like the offensive line, defensive line, secondary, those and defenses, they'll metrically be better as a unit than individual PFF grades show. And I think that the common denominator, though, with all of those, at least from what we've seen, I feel like is just good coaching or a very unique system that is run very well and developed very well, i.e., Whittingham at Utah State, Kansas State, Heupel with the Tennessee
It's
offense.
it's it's the veer and shoot, man.
Yes, and I think that's why it unit and metrically is very good as a unit, even though individual grades not may not be the best. But the bottom line is, I think the offensive line is going to be pretty good again because most of those guys are coming back. I think obviously Jalen Wright's a huge loss. Very happy about Jalen Wright, by the way. He's if you're in a very deep fantasy league, take a flyer on Jalen Wright, just FYI, because he's looking like he's going to be pretty good for the Dolphins. But anyways. As far as the defense, I'm with you. I think the defense has to take a step back, man. They lost so many guys. The back end, very questionable. Safety room, secondary, very, very questionable. The first thing I did, like you said, when I looked at the schedule, I was like, all right, who are teams on the schedule that can really air the ball out on them? Because I think that's what's going to happen. And you're right, Tennessee is going to play in a lot of high scoring games this year. So I like the offense to improve. I think the defense is going to take a step back. My model has 7.9 wins, which I think is pretty fair. I'm a little bit higher than the model. I think Tennessee is good for 8.5, maybe 9 wins, I would say. I
I mean,
think
like I
at the end
told
of
you,
the
shoot,
year.
when I was talking about it, 7.58. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, I think 9-3, I feel like is a very fair high end assessment, I think, or prediction. So at the end of the day, I think Tennessee will have a 9-3 record, but with this line, that's an under, and I'm going to go at it with medium confidence. And again, I'm on the higher end, I think, of the predictions on Tennessee because I do think Nico is the goods. But I would definitely not bet this win total if you're over on Tennessee. If you like Tennessee, don't bet this win total. Take Tennessee on like a flyer to win the SEC or a flyer to make the college football playoff. Don't go and run and grab the highest number out there with plus juice because the sports books are dangling the carrot for to steal your money. Don't do that. That's my best advice, amateur advice there. So, anyways, which by the way, I did put personal money on this under. I said I don't
But
care.
by the way, I did take the carrot. No.
No, I went the other way, man. I did what the sports books don't want you to do, and I laid the money down. I laid like $2 down to win the dollar.
$2. Not
Not
even a
not
dollar at minus
no no no
215.
no not actual $2. Come on, those days
Oh.
are gone. This isn't our college days. This is no
Oh
I
my God, man. If you actually put a $2 bet on a
no
minus 215 line, that would be
no
nuts.
no no no. I'm speaking in terms of. I'll put it this way. I laid $1 to win 50 cents in terms of the denominator there. So you get my point. All right,
Yeah.
let's wrap this up here, and we don't need to spend too much time on these guys. Sorry, Vandy, but you're saving the worst for
The
last,
worst for last, yeah.
unfortunately. But you know what, man, Clark Lee does a good job there. It's just Vander's just a tough job, man. It's just impossible to
They're
win
they're
there.
not they're not in the SEC for football. They're in there for baseball and academics.
They're there to give other SEC teams free conference wins when they fall on their schedule. That's really what it's for. But anyways,
Exactly.
Vanderbilt comes in with a win total of 3 wins even, a little juice on the over at minus 130. Clark Lee's in his fourth season there. 2-10 last year. That was a rough season last year for Vandy. 2-10, a little bit of a dip after they went 5-7 in 2022. That 5-win year showed them or gave them a little bit of promise for last year, but did not come to fruition. And now I think a little bit more optimism that they can beat that win total number from last year. But what's your say, Zan?
I mean, this was a bad team last year. It's kind of standard for Vandy. I mean, it's hard to be Vandy in the SEC. It's an academic school too. They have academic standards, so it really doesn't help them in that regard either. But hey, look, they brought in a transfer from New Mexico State, Diego Pavia, probably going to be the starter. Then they got some transfer insurance in Nate Johnson, but I mean, he's a 3,000-yard passer, 26 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He's not a scrub, but I mean, the rest of the roster is just not good, man. I mean, like in terms of the offense, anyway. I think there's something to on their defense that I really like, but on the offensive side, man, you've got Cedric Alexander and Jamani Jones, who also comes from New Mexico State, and both of those guys average less than 4 yards a carry. Very inefficient running. And to be fair, it's probably because they're going against these SEC D lines. Well, I guess not Jamani Jones, but Cedric Alexander is going against these SEC D lines with, you know, 3-star offensive linemen. So it doesn't make things any better. Not to mention Vanderbilt lost their best wide receiver in London Humphreys. He went to Georgia. And now all you've got was what Loic Founji from Texas Tech, and then these other guys who might have like 300 yards to their name from last season. I mean, there's not a lot of production. You bring in Stephen Hubbard from UTEP, but the rest of the offensive line's also mostly transfers and a little bit suspect from the returners. You look at the defensive line, they've got some transfers there too, but overall it's in a below average unit, and that's for P4 standards, not just SEC standards. So lines of scrimmage not looking too good. Linebackers, you've at least got Langston Patterson coming back, but other than that, you don't really have much. I do like the secondary though. I mean, you bring in Marlon Jones from EWU, pretty solid guy, grades out well on pass coverage, and then you've got two good safeties in CJ Taylor and DeRicky Wright, who actually grade out pretty well. So you've got a good secondary. But ultimately, man, when everything else on the team is suspect, the secondary can only do so much, the quarterback can only do so much. Those are the only two things I like. I think there's potential for the quarterback, and there's a good secondary here, but it's not complete enough of a team for those small increments or those small pieces on either side of the ball to really make that much of a difference. It's going to be tough for them, man. They play Virginia Tech week 1. They're going to lose that game. You play Alcorn State, you should win that game. You go at Georgia State, it's going to be like more of a toss up. Then you go at Missouri, you probably lose that game. Bye week to prepare for Bama. Might as well not even prepare for Bama on that bye week. You're going to lose that, you know. Then you go at Kentucky, you're going to lose. You play Ball State, you should win that game. Okay, cool. We're looking at 2, maybe 3 wins if you get the Georgia State game. And already at push, Texas lose, at Auburn lose, South Carolina lose, bye week to play at LSU, still lose. Start studying for your finals in that bye week. Then you go at LSU and lose. And then Tennessee, you're probably going to lose, man. So, I mean, like, I see Alcorn State, maybe Georgia State, Ball State. Man, I think that's legit the only 3 games that they're going to win on their schedule, Shu. And if they don't get the Georgia State game, it's actually an under.
Yeah.
Legitimately, I think it's more likely that they go 2-10 than they go 4-8. And I know it's juice to the over, but I'm actually going to go under, Shu. I'm going to go under with low confidence because there is maybe the possibility that maybe Vandy does catch someone napping, but I don't see it. I think Alcorn State, Georgia State, and Ball State are going to be their wins, and that's that.
Yeah, the bottom line is 3 wins seems like a ceiling to me because outside of those 3 non-con games that we're going to give them, and I think it's generous to give them, you need to upset somebody. You need to upset an SEC team to get this over because we're just going to assume that Virginia Tech's pretty good. They're not going to be Virginia Tech. So you have to beat an SEC team. You got to get an SEC win in order to get this over. I don't see that happening. I think my model is low on Vandy. It only has 2.2 wins. I think of all the SEC games, South Carolina at home is probably their only / best shot at getting an SEC win. And the model only thinks Vandy has a 6% chance to win that game. It is South Carolina as a very sizable favorite, and I think that's fair. I mean, yeah, I don't see it happening. Sorry, Clarkley, but I found it interesting that he's going to be taking over the play calling on defense from last year because it was a sub 100 defense, kind of reminiscent of Dave Aranda at Baylor. He's just saying, screw it. I'm calling the plays now, taking
If you're
ownership of
gonna
my
fire me,
defense.
I'm going down with my own calls. Like,
Hey, exactly. But yes, I mean, there's reason for optimism at offense. Like, I like the new OC. He brought over Diego Pavia from New Mexico State, who graded very well, did very well at the CUSA level. But how much is your success in the Conference USA going to translate to the SEC? Because the Conference USA is easily the worst conference in the G5. It is very bad. But they did beat Auburn last year, so let's keep in mind this OC and Diego Pavia win the Jordan Hare and beat Auburn last year. So, maybe that's something that you can write home about. But I do, you know, looking at it in a vacuum though, I do like the fact that they have both Nate Johnson and Diego Pavia. Like those are two pretty solid quarterbacks that I actually like that a lot, but
they have
is it good
insurance, but
enough?
man, the rest of that offense, though,
Yeah.
God, man,
I like it in a vacuum, but it's not good enough with
yeah.
the rest of the roster and with this schedule. I mean, this schedule is just you don't there's no room to breathe here and my model thinks Ball State and at Georgia State are toss-ups. It literally has them as 50-50. So, I'll give you at least one of those, but yeah, I think 2-10 or 3-9 is going to be the final record here. I don't see them getting an SEC win. If they do, then tip of the cap, I'll be very surprised with this roster. So, I'm going to go under, and my confidence level is medium confidence because I just don't see them getting the 4 wins. So I'm going to go under here, and I like to push insurance. All right, man. That'll conclude the former SEC East teams. And looking at the board here, we have a pretty fair balance of overs and unders here, not really swaying one side or the other. I think our biggest disagreement was Georgia, believe it or not, which kind of surprising, but other than that, I'd say fairly in agreement here on most of these teams. And yeah, I'm excited to get into the rest of the SEC here over the next few days. So, any final remarks here before we wrap it up?
Final remarks. I think Georgia will be in the SEC championship. That's why I went out with low confidence. But even if they're 10-2, that's probably SEC championship with the how everything is nowadays, with how stacked that league is. But the only reason for my 10-2, man, is because the teams that I do think they can potentially lose to on their schedule, they're all away games. So we'll see how it works out for them.
And 10-2 still gets them into the college football playoff. I think
It
that's for sure.
does.
So,
That's 100% for sure.
wouldn't be the end of the world if you're a Georgia fan. All right, man. That'll wrap us up for SEC win totals part 1. We're doing Alabama, Auburn, LSU, Ole Miss, and Miss State next for part 2. See you guys later. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.